we go. We have it. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to this special council meeting. And want to note that all members are present, even though I think Councillor Edwards is on vacation. Thank you for joining us. And also our CIO is on vacation, but joining us from his home office as well. So thank you both for doing that. We also today want to acknowledge that we are on lands traditionally occupied by Indigenous peoples. And it's been Indigenous peoples that have cared for this territory for the benefit of future generations. Their stewardship throughout the ages, we certainly appreciate. We are streaming today. Anyone who's joining us on the call today, we're consenting to your images being broadcast. So thank you for that. We did not receive any public comments through our email. And there is no acknowledgement or no supplementary agenda for us to acknowledge today. I will ask if there's any declaration of pecuniary interest today. And I'm not seeing any. I will also say that we've been having some issues with internet from the storm a few days ago at the township office for those people who've been trying to connect. We've made some provisions to get us through for those people in the office, but maybe a little bit choppy for the clerk or deputy clerk or any of our senior staff who are in the office today. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Today's meeting stems from our strategic plan and also from our prior council discussion that basically we're really trying to understand. Oh, I'm not sure. Barb, are you talking to us? Or are you not sure? Everybody, you can hear me okay?
Sorry, Mayor Harding. I'm trying to find a place where my internet is stable in my house. So I could be moving around a little and I may go off camera, but I'll come on camera to vote if there's any voting.
Not a problem. I saw you waving frantically. I didn't know whether I was on mute or something, but appreciate that. Anyway, the purpose of today's discussion is to truly understand our interplay, if you will, in our two-tier system. And as such, Strategy Corp has joined us today. We have Chris Loreto, Michael Fenn, and John Matheson, who is joining us, but I don't believe is here yet. I don't see John on the call, but I don't believe we need any of our staff introductions. Chris, are you going to take this over, or Michael? And I can turn the floor over to you to take us through today's deck, if that's okay with you. Oh, yeah, actually, if I may, before you start on that, I'm going to read one resolution just to make things a little bit more free-flowing today. And I have a resolution moved by Councillor Bridgman, seconded by Councillor Nishikawa. And be it resolved that pursuant to section 232 of the Township Procedural Bylaw 2019-79, as amended, the rules of procedure are hereby suspended for the duration of the District of Muskoka Service Review discussion, and that they be reinstated at the conclusion of said discussion. I think you're sharing your screen, but I'll call for the vote on that. All those in favor, you can see our hands up just so we make sure we're all present and accounted for. Madam Clerk, I think we're good. That is carried. Thank you. Appreciate that. And okay, Chris, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Your Worship. And it's great to be with you and members of council again to talk about the Township of Muskoka Lakes relationship with the District of Muskoka. What I want to start with is just a little bit of an overview of the agenda that we have for the couple of hours that we're going to be spending together today. And this is the first of a two-part workshop series where we're looking at that relationship and coming to understand how we might be able to work with our colleagues at the district to strengthen the relationship and have a better understanding of who does what and how services are delivered in the interests of taxpayers. I'll introduce our team in just a second. We'll go over the purpose of the workshop in the review of the township's goals with respect to this inter-tier project. And as you noted, Your Worship, this is something that did come out of the strategic planning process that we were privileged enough to work with you on. And so it's really exciting to be working with you on this. And then we have a bit of a foundational presentation that outlines the legislative and the fiscal context governing or influencing the relationship between the township and the district, and also look at some of the options that are available to the township to enhance its relationship with the district. And when we go through that foundational presentation, there will be an opportunity for members of council to ask questions, to seek clarification on some of the items that we are presenting. And then once we have the benefit of that foundational presentation in hand, we'll have a discussion amongst council. We have 3 discussion questions we'd like to take you through for the purposes of identifying potential issues or areas of priority for a district level service delivery review. And so with that, I'll just state what the purpose of the workshop is to provide you with that foundational briefing and to facilitate a discussion on the legislative policy, service delivery, and the fiscal context influencing your relationship with the district. As always, we encourage members of council to ask questions of our team on this context, and this is really meant to start a conversation on areas that may be explored in a service delivery review to be completed by the District of Muskoka. I would note that inter-tier relationships are sometimes opaque at best, and so there is a lot of nuance in the relationship, so please don't hesitate to ask questions on this. We have Michael Fenn with us, who's certainly, I think, written the book on municipal on municipal governance and relationships in the province of Ontario, and John Matheson, my colleague, as well. The output of this workshop is going to be used by our team to undertake further research on your relationship with the District of Muskoka and to design and facilitate that second workshop I noted a little bit earlier, where we will discuss and prioritize issues, areas of focus for to be explored through a service delivery review exercise to be completed by the district itself. In terms of who's with you today, I mentioned
Chris,
Michael.
if I can just, before we
Yes.
go on for 1 second, I see Councillor Jaglitz raised his hand. If you want questions as we go through or how you want to deal with that, but Councillor Jaglitz, you had a quick question before we really get into this?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up on the question part. Do you want us to interrupt as you're presenting each section, or do you want us to wait till the end, or how do you want questions? You've asked us to submit them. How do you want us to actually do that? Thank you.
So what I'll do, Councillor, is I'll pause after the presentation of each slide to see if there are questions from members of council. I think we have about 60 minutes to get through the foundational presentation that includes questions. And so I would encourage you to ask them as I pause, if that's okay. And that way, you're getting your questions in right away, and they're not escaping the mind as we're waiting for the rest of the presentation to be completed.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Okay. Okay, and as I mentioned, Michael Fenn, who's a senior advisor with our firm, is with us today, as is my colleague John Matheson, and myself. Chloe and Chris are also with us today. We put together this presentation and answering your questions, and also taking your feedback for us to conduct that additional research and to conduct the next workshop with council. So what I do want to do is just contextualize what we understand the goal the goals of the township to be for this inter-tier project. And luckily, we had the benefit of working with you through the strategic planning process. And it was during that process that council included a goal of strengthening key relationships in that document. And one of the objectives under that goal is to identify specific measures that, if they are achieved, will improve the township's governance, fiscal, and programmatic relationship with the district. We have subsequently been retained to provide guidance on a strategic approach to the township's relationship with the district, and that's why we're here today. And the goal really is to help the township achieve a greater level of equity with its service delivery partners, and to better understand the opportunities that exist when efficient and effective shared service delivery is achieved between the township, its lower tier municipal colleagues, and the district itself. And the output of this project, as I said, is to identify governance, fiscal, and programmatic issues or areas to be fully explored through a district level service delivery review. I'll just pause there to see if there's any comment, Your Worship, from Council on how we're understanding the objectives of Council in undertaking this project.
Sorry, I'm not seeing any hands right now. And over to you. Keep going.
Okay, so now we'll get into the meat of the foundational briefing, and we'll start with a review of the current service delivery landscape within the district and the relationship between the district and the township, but also the relationship relative to the province. I think this diagram will be familiar to members of council, as it is a diagram that has been produced by the district. It outlines those areas where those service areas that are exclusively within the respective bailiwicks of the township or the province or the district. And then there are certain overlapping or shared responsibilities, particularly around economic development, emergency planning, roads, the environment, parks, land use planning, natural resources, things of that nature. We'll talk a little bit about where the district spends its money that is provided by taxpayers in a minute. But this diagram is really to illustrate who does what in the context of key service relationships, and will be. I would say a lot of this stuff is fair game in terms of thinking through your relationship with the district, even where the overlap may be exclusively from a provincial or district perspective, because the relationship there is always changing. Things as you're well aware have been downloaded, things have been uploaded or partially uploaded. The service relationship has been changing, and or the municipalities have had to come into certain areas that aren't exclusively or maybe in their jurisdiction, but have had to make up for things like municipal or senior government funding shortfalls. One of the things we've observed, where we talk about long-term care, while the district is required to have under legislation to have long-term, at least one long-term care home. We know in our experience working with a number of municipalities across the province, many municipalities have ended up putting extra money into services like that in order to make up for underfunding or slow growth funding from the province, is just one example. So when we're talking about the service delivery relationship, obviously we'll focus on those things where there's the shared jurisdiction between the township and the district, but there are increasingly pressures on the district and thereby the township and its lower tier colleagues, given provincial decisions around funding or policy in spaces that are typically just the overlap, either exclusively provincial jurisdiction or the relationship is really with the upper tier being the district. I'll just stop there to see if there are any questions on the respective jurisdictions and responsibilities.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Hayes and then Councillor Jagowitz.
Thank you. Through you. When I'm looking at this chart, I'm coming up with a few questions. So let's start with heritage. Heritage is also identified in the district area, and it's also governed basically by the provincial rules. So this should probably be something that, yes, we have our heritage. We also partner with the district with their scenic heritage, and we are legislated by the rules. So this is something that should probably be in the middle section. As for the parks, I don't believe that there are any district parks. I believe that there's only provincial and lower tier parks. So that probably should be moved up to have a relationship directly there. What else did I have? Attainable housing. The province has policies on attainable housing. The district actually has a district group that is looking at attainable housing. The money flows to the district, but attainable housing is also looked at in the lower tiers. And most of the lower tiers are working on trying to create opportunities for attainable housing. So I believe that's something that should be in the middle section with all three. Libraries, again, libraries, they have to follow the policy from the province. So that would be something between the province and the lower tier. And just to note that libraries are autonomous to be run. So there is another party there. What else did I have? Parks. No, I think that was it. The rest of my comments I'll leave for time when we're talking about quantifying these services.
Great, thank you, Councillor.
Okay, I will also say, Councillor Hayes, the district does own James Bartleman Park in Port Carling. Councillor Jagowitz.
Thank you, Chair. I too have a great deal of difficulty with this chart, and I was glad that, Chris, that you mentioned it was the district document. Because if you look at it, you can see that the district role is the biggest. And that is, I believe, is maybe the perception. I think this should be completely withdrawn, and I'd be looking for maybe Michael's comment on some areas, but let me just comment on a couple. For example, this chart says that long-term care is the sole responsibility of the district, but we know that isn't true. Long-term care is a provincial responsibility. The district has a role, but the province doesn't seem to be in on that. When we look at ambulance, once again, it's a similar thing. The district is responsible, but it's another, once again, a provincial responsibility. Then we go to a thing called hospitals and healthcare. That's solely in the provincial responsibility. Well, if that's the case, then what's our district doing in that business? And then we get into the ones that become a little trickier to deal with, and that's police. And I think this is the district view of where the responsibilities lie. So before we finish this this project of ours, I think we need to possibly question some of these. And certainly, if we've got experts here, it'd be very, very helpful. Thank you.
Your Worship, is it okay if we ask Michael to comment?
Absolutely, and I also want to welcome John Matheson, who's joined us, I see. And but no, happy to, obviously I think there's some blurred lines between many of these, and I'm not sure we are going to solve all this through what we want to do, but maybe there's another document that talks about blurred lines. I'll leave it to you to answer Councillor Jagowitz, and I think also at the same time Councillor Hayes' question, and then I'll go to Councillor Roberts afterwards.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Well, there's an old adage that all models are wrong, but some are helpful. The model that we have here obviously speaks to a number of things, and as the councillor was saying, there may be areas where the province is involved because it does the regulation or it sets the legislative framework, but doesn't get involved directly in the service delivery. And there are other areas where hospitals is probably a good example, and clinics and physician recruitment. Healthcare may in fact be a provincial responsibility, but on the financial level, the municipalities get drawn into it. So I think what we're really trying to do, and I think your questions and observations reinforce this, is we're trying to point out that it's a complicated relationship, and that none of it is crisp in the sense that it's entirely your responsibility. Even the things that are very much your responsibility, say like volunteer firefighting, are still governed by provincial regulations and statutes. And so there's an overlap in virtually every one of these areas. You could find something where one of the parties is playing a role, however small.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Yes, the fire services, I was going to highlight that one. From my perspective, the bulk of the work is done by the municipalities. So this is is a good example of how some groups think they're involved and have a lot of involvement according to ourselves. And we got to define those roles and responsibilities. And maybe there's parts of that maybe the township doesn't need to be involved with and can give it to the district or vice versa. So this is what I hope you get out of this exercise. Thank you.
Okay, Chris.
Okay, great. Thank you. So let's start off with the legislative context that governs the relationship between the township in the district. As the slide notes, everything in terms of most everything in terms of the relationship between the township and the district is governed by the Municipal Act, and the approach under the Municipal Act in terms of how an upper tier government, in this case the district, is funded, is to use weighted assessment, and this is legislated. So that what that means is that lower tier municipalities that account for a greater share of the overall assessment in an upper tier will pay more of the upper tier levy. And it's in section 311 of the Municipal Act that it defines how the general upper tier levy is to be garnered. And so the purpose of the approach that is set out in the legislation is to add an element of progressive taxation to the property tax system, where municipalities with a greater assessed value contribute more to the operation of the district. So yes, it's a progressive basis of taxation. There really is nothing that the district can do to mess with how this program works, because it's defined in legislation. I often relate it back to kind of fiscal federalism in terms of richer provinces or better off provinces contribute to equalization that is then distributed to less well-off provinces to make sure that there is a certain level of fairness in terms of the services that people are able to access, regardless of whether or not they live in Newfoundland or Ontario or British Columbia. So in terms of, and we'll go through this in the fiscal context, in terms of what the township is contributing, you're being treated per the legislation in terms of you have a larger share of the overall value of the assessment in the district, and therefore your taxpayers contribute more to the district to fund its budget. And I'll just stop there, Your Worship, to see if there are questions about this, and I will rely on my colleagues, John Matheson and Michael Fenn, to answer any specifics on this.
Okay, thank you. I see Councillor Jaglowitz, Councillor Bridgman, then Councillor Hayes.
Thank you, Chair, through you. Yes, there's nothing wrong with the statement as written. It's just it's not complete in my view. There are things called special levies, special purpose levies, and in the district there are at least three. There's one for water, there's one for wastewater, and there's one for solid waste. And in my view, there should be others. And these are where the level of service is not provided equally across the entire district tax base. And I don't know the section that allows these, but certainly they're clearly allowed. And I believe when we go forward, I think this, if you're looking for input into this, this is an area that I believe we need to delve into, where it applies, where it doesn't apply, and if it and as Michael said, and I have to go back to his comments, that nothing is crisp and it's complicated. And I think part of this session is we'd like to look at some of those areas. At least this is my view. Sorry, I should say I'd like to look at some of the areas where I believe the way these costs are being allocated could be improved upon, and not just take the status quo because the district says and their legal advisors say that doesn't necessarily make it so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll take that as a comment as we work our way through. Councillor Bridgman, then Councillor Hayes.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So yes, as Councillor Jaglowitz said, that those are all the things that I need to understand going forward, which I'm sure you get, Chris. And I may be jumping your slides here, but I'm curious if there was downloading of certain services to us then that I am assuming comes off the district sharing rate. So that would be, I just wanted to confirm that. So let's say planning came down to us, that comes right off the plate at district for us. And we're not going to be part of a split the levy, even if other municipalities still had planning as part of their deal. And maybe this is the wrong place to ask it, but at some point I would like to understand that.
No, it's a good question, Councillor John or Michael. Do you want to take that question?
Sorry, I was just finding my mute button. Nice to see everyone. Yes, one of the things you can do is you can reduce the scope of services that are delivered by the district and in effect opt out of it so that it's funded by the people who are continuing to receive the service. That's exactly right.
If I can comment, and I'm not sure whether Chris or Michael, but those people have been around this table with myself for quite a while. We did download IT services, and the portion we were paying was downloaded, but there's still a district-wide portion of IT that we are still required to pay.
Yeah, and so it's those types of things that I think are worth looking at. You know, if they're not providing you any service, you know, you may still have to contribute through the levy to support the IT function that is at the district to help the district run itself. There, you know, that IT services, I think, is also, Michael and John, another area where, you know, you could reduce the scope, as you have reduced the scope of services, and have it funded in a different manner, maybe on a fee for service basis. If it's the case where you opted out, but you're still contributing to the IT services that the district's providing to other municipalities within the district, then that's something, you know, again, where you can look.
Councillor Hayes.
Okay, thank you. Through you, just to touch on something that Councillor Jagowitz brought up, I'm looking at what is quantifiable and what is not. Services that would not be quantifiable would be services that are available to everybody in the District of Muskoka. We never know who's using them, so that would be like long-term care, ambulance, airport, our landfills, social housing. Things that are quantifiable are things that we can count. For example, garbage collection. We know how many people in each lower tier have garbage collection. So I think about 5 or 6 years ago, we learned what the ratio was for policing. We didn't know that before. It wasn't quantifiable. Now it is. The roads are quantifiable, land use planning, and wastewater and drinking water are quantifiable. They are not available to everybody in the district, but yet everybody in the district is paying for them. So these are things that we could work on making fairer for everybody, make them more of a usage kind of, rather than having the whole of the district have to pay for them, make it more like a household pay. And then when it gets to the lower tier, whether we decide to charge it as a household or a mill rate, that would be up to us. But at least we would be paying the fair share of the usage.
I'll just ask a point of clarity because I'm 99% sure if you referenced water and wastewater, I believe only those people who are on water and wastewater are paying for water and wastewater. For those waterfront communities that are not, they do not contribute to that. Director Donaldson, maybe you can answer that question.
Thank you, Worship. That is correct. Sorry, just confirming that is correct.
Okay, great. Thanks. Chris?
Okay, so all great comments. So what I'll do is I'll go through the fiscal context slides as a batch, and then we'll pause for questions. So,
okay, Chris, I've got one more quick question on this slide. So, Councillor Zabit, sorry
please.
about that.
Yes, thank you, and through you. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Not bad, Councillor.
Good, man, thanks. Listen, I guess I'm just wondering here. So I'm hearing very, very specific directional thoughts from fellow councillors. And of course, we all have a lot of input that I think we want to have, and that's why we're here. I guess what I'm wondering about is, and I know you need to go through this deck, but first things first, right? You've done a really good job of a situational analysis, if you will. Now here it is in front of us. I was rather hoping we would keep this at a higher level, if you will, today, and not get into specific pieces of this puzzle, and then move into perhaps that dissection, if you will, in say part 2 of this, because I think the bigger fear or concern that I have is, hey, district, here's the information. We're paying the most. Are we burning off the most of their services? Are we, the middle child? Are we using up 32% of their resources? And so that's a question that we can only ask once we pose the question to them. And I thought that's what this process was to get to that point where we could pose some questions to them. I think we need to talk about the specifics. Of course we will, but I kind of thought that was going to be down the road once we understood the shape and size and color of this thing. So I just, maybe just to confuse even more, I throw that out there. Thank you.
No, so what we're intending to do is, make sure everybody has, agrees with the common fact base and understands the dynamics, Councillor. What we do want to is get the benefit of, things that where council, is unclear as to whether or not, how those are being funded, how that service is being used, and whether or not, that, that situation is equitable from the township perspective relative to the other lower tiers and residents who are taking advantage of that service. We have to surface those issues because I wish it was simple as saying, go into the district budget and know, not only what you spend, but where you spend it, right? And know how much of that goes to the township, how much of that goes to the other lower tiers. It's never that straight, clear cut. In fact, Michael and John can comment on this. Very rare, and I'm not aware of a situation, maybe with the exception of certain services, where an upper tier actually knows how much of that budget is going proportionately to the various lower tiers in the geography. And so without really knowing that, again, that opacity that exists, beginning to identify areas where we think there is a problem or where there is a more equitable arrangement to be identified is what we want to do. We can do a little bit more research on that and say, yes, this might be fruitful to explore through a district level service delivery review, so you understand your options and how either your residents can access this, better access those services, or look at different arrangements for how those services are delivered. Michael or John, anything you would want to add to that?
2 quick points. One is you're right about the way in which the district in this case does its service delivery. For example, they may decide from an engineering point of view that it makes sense to contract for a resurfacing of 4 kilometers of roads. And even if it goes across a township boundary, they don't break the tender based on the boundary. They base it on what makes good engineering sense for a specific public works project. So they may not, in many cases, have any good way of deciding who's getting the service or how it's being distributed according to local municipalities. Certainly that's true for some of the health and social services functions. The other thing is there's a bit of a philosophical difference that we need to always be conscious of too. I mean, we don't levy school taxes on the basis of do you have kids in school or not. We levy them for everybody. And so there's some element of which there's a Commonwealth approach to this, in the sense that everybody contributes and anybody benefits that should benefit, and everybody shares the cost. So you can't, at some point it makes it challenging to try and unpack the levy down to the point that you treat it like a credit union or something like that. It's a government, and you're going to have to allow for some governmental decision making.
Chris, we'll go back and let you just continue on, I guess, through the deck, and we'll circle back as we want to dive deeper as the presentation goes on.
Okay, so let's review the fiscal context, and this is very high level. We take the data from the financial information returns that are filed by all municipalities, including the district, and then we did have a look at where the district is spending its total dollars. And so, as I said, the way that the Township of Muskoka Lakes is being treated on the weighted assessment basis is consistent with legislation. You have seen your overall upper tier contributions to the district increase by 13% in 2020 over what you were paying in 2016. But that's because your assessments have increased as well. And so you contributed about 154 million in overall upper tier levies in that 4-year period. And it increased from 28.9 million to 32 million to get to that 13% increase. And that is consistent because you've had a 13% increase in your assessment base as well.
Councillor Jegowitz, hang on a sec, Councillor Jegowitz.
Okay. I'm happy to wait for the pause, or is this the pause?
I was just going that way because you were on that slide, so and my apologies then.
No.
If it's relative to a slide, I get you to put your hands up. If it's at the end of the section, then I'll get you to put your hands up.
No, it's relative to this slide. So thank you for allowing me then. This is said, I hope you take this in a respectful manner. I believe this slide is flawed and misleading, and that's not a criticism. I just think it doesn't present the facts as they are. What you've shown here is a combination of the general tax levy and the 3 special levies together. And the 3 special levies you've included are waste management, water, and sewer. And in those areas, I'm sure you're well aware that the township is primarily unserviced, only having 800 serviced properties. And its share of those range from 7 or 8% to 20%. And that's why you arrived at that number 32. So that's a blended number. And if you're going to state something, I think you have to show the general tax levy, of which we pay 29 million of 78.4 million, which is 37%. And then we pay a much lower percentage on those special levies, which is understandable because we don't get the service. So I think that's important to note. And this ties into what I pointed out on page 12, where you talk about the legislative part. The legislative, it doesn't take all costs and share them by the assessed value of properties. There are other costs that are not. Now, a couple other things were mentioned that I hadn't even thought about. Somebody mentioned IT. Well, in IT, because the district is providing a high level of service to a couple of municipalities, they actually bill off the grid. Those people are billed for that. They're not in the levy. And also, there are other arrangements where, for example, one comes to mind where the district shared a facility with Bracebridge, their new fire hall, and those are other costs. So I think this slide would be more meaningful if we kept it to the general tax levy. And if you wanted to include the others, show them in addition too. Thank you.
This slide is just showing that the upper tier contributions, and I think the councillor's point, have been consistent across lower tier municipalities over 5 years, but the per household increase was greatest for Muskoka Lakes. So the relative share across all the lower tiers funding the district has remained consistent. I think that reflects the fact that assessments have been going up in lower tiers across the district as well, though you do see a bit of a spike in terms of what your contribution is per household. That is likely a function of higher assessed values and fewer properties when you do the math. And then what we looked at just at a very high level is where, you know, what the district is spending, both in terms of capital and operating. You know, we looked at the district budget, looking at capital expenditures. Why are we looking at capital expenditures? Well, when we get into the options, capital expenditures is maybe one area where there is an opportunity to drive a better deal, to understand, you know, what's getting funded when and how much of that is actually happening in the township versus in other lower tiers. There looks to be coming forward a decline in the capital spend at the district level. We just raised this for information purposes again, because you know, one of the things we've done when we've done this in other municipalities, looking at the relationship between the lower tier and upper tier, is, you know, looking at the value of projects that happen is one way to better understand what the relationship is and what you're getting relative to what you're contributing, certainly on the capital side. And then we looked at what's funded from the district's net levy, so the revenue from property tax. You know, it largely goes to a number of areas, which is, you know, obviously policing is a major cost that that is funded through the district. Roads reserve, so saving for investments in road capital and maintenance in the future, and the road maintenance itself. Community and planning services, and health services. And this just shows the relative level of spend based contribution from the levy over the last 3 years, including this year's district budget. But when we look at the spend when all sources of revenue are in, so the general levy plus fee revenue and provincial transfers, things like environmental services and social and family services become the largest overall spends by the district, and that is not unusual. You know, particularly for social and family services, the district is the service manager and has service delivery responsibilities, and does get some transfers from the province to contribute to that. And on you know, environment, there are still significant spends outside of you know, fees and senior level government funding around transportation and policing. Though if you look at it, well, you know, community and planning look to be a fairly significant from the general levy. When you throw all sources of revenue in, planning and development is a relatively minor overall portion of the entirety of the district's budget.
Got a couple of questions on this slide, Chris. Maybe we'll back up if that's okay.
That's not a problem.
And Councillor Jagowitz.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I'd like to go back one slide, please. You list police services there, and I need some education in this area. I see this as an account that the district is performing an account management role only, i.e. the percentage all township pays a percentage of money, and in the very simplest terms, the district writes the check, but they might also have an account management. So it sort of skews the whole thing, as does education. Education sets the budget. We collect the money, pass it to the district, and district is writing the check. I don't know how much more they do. So it sort of, you know, it can make their pot of work bigger, in my opinion, but really that might be one person performing that role, or a quarter of a person. So what are your thoughts on that?
Michael or John, perspectives?
Well, it's certainly true that what would you say, the amount of discretion there is over the police services is not as great as it would be in areas where you have control over the service levels. And so the chart illustrates what you spend. It doesn't imply that there's a degree of control over how much you spend. There is a formula that you're all familiar with that in fact you've pushed back on a bit, and you've improved the terms a little bit, as you can see from those numbers. So there is an element there, but it is, as the councillor described, it's basically a service that you get invoiced for and that is paid out of the district levy on that basis. Other functions are much more discretionary, roads being the most obvious.
Councillor
Follow up
Jagosz,
if I may.
Go ahead.
Okay, yes, I agree with that. There's other big ones like roads and that are very, the district is really involved, but I'm thinking that we don't want to, I don't think we should muddy the waters too much by including education and police services in the numbers, have it in a separate one. Because that's really not, they're separate from the district, and I know that we will talk about police services only. That's what I'm saying is, thank you.
Yeah, and if I just may say, to build on the councillor's point, we just wanted to show this is where the spend is. When it comes to the next level, it's like, okay, if we look at the big spends, where do we have most discretion and control over the service levels, and where can we take a deeper look and figure out, the equity of how that is funded and how that service is distributed versus things like, we could spend all day trying to figure this out, but we're stuck under a contract, or we're, the province so heavily regulates this that there is very narrow maneuverability on something like that. So what we want to eventually get to are there, a number of specific areas that we would say, district, it's important to look at this, and then let's look at these things from an equity perspective and how those services are funded, how those services are consumed, and figure out if, is that the best deal we can arrange, or is there something that is more appropriate given how the service is consumed and who benefits from it?
Your Worship, I think we've said earlier, what we're trying to do is show the global picture, and then with council's help, zero in on those things where there might be some potential. For example, on community services, for example, or say Ontario Works and things of that kind, that if you're going to save some money there, for every dollar you save, probably 75 cents goes back to the province if you find some way to save money there. Whereas if you save money on roads, you save $1. And in other areas like in police, there's not much potential for saving money, so you shouldn't devote most of your attention to that. But when it's a big number like that, it's probably worth a serious look in case there is something that even at the margins, maybe it's 90% personnel, but the 10% might be an area where you could get some money. So it's there's a bit of a follow the money dimension to this, and we're not pretending it's an exact science.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Jagowitz, and then Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I'm going to respond to the last speaker just before I say what I was going to say. I don't think you should discount something like policing, as you have, when you consider that the individual invoice for policing for TML is 2.7 million, TML pays 5.7 or 3 million more than its proportionate share. And it does that because it's added onto the tax levy. So there is maybe not a saving to the district overall, but there's a lot of potential there for the township. And I think that's what this exercise is about. But getting back to the document itself, the last four pages that you showed, once again, I believe you're calling this a foundational document. And as such, I believe it should be modified to reflect it more accurately. The first two pages that you're showing, which are the upper levy contributions and expenditure and capital projects, includes the 3 special service areas, which have significant capital costs, very significant. And then when you show the chart on page 16 as to the 5-year growth in payment, you see Huntsville at 15% and you see TML at 13%. And that's because Huntsville, its residential part is growing, its service area is growing, and therefore they're getting a higher share of user fees because of that. TML doesn't have any growth in its serviced area at all. Its growth is in the non-serviced area. So I believe if you're going to use this as a foundational document, you have to break out those costs. Then the last 2 pages, page 18 and 19, are right out of the district budget the general tax supported budget, which does not include the 3 special areas. And that's why you don't see any water, wastewater, or so on in those expenditures. So once again, I think it's as a foundational document, I think it's flawed. Thank you.
Duly noted. Thank you, Councillor Jagos. Councillor Nishikawa?
Boy, I guess I've learned over the years to simplify things because it can get very, very frustrating. When discussions for the number of years I spent on community services, 8 years, and all of that was wrapped in community services isn't what it is today. Joined in with planning, but there was often made in Muskoka initiatives that would come along, and lots of applause to those department heads that made that happen and create other abilities and things that were needed from folks. Or there might be just a suggestion from the province. Wouldn't it be nice if you did this? And then we would take it on with a little bit of funding, and then that funding would not be available for the next year. We never really did. We hired people, but I would say we shifted people. I guess my biggest message is pretty tough area for our township in particular to dive into community services, social services, I will say. We don't have a housing model in our own township. And in fact, I don't know that we ever have contemplated it. And again, the same with, you can compare us to Huntsville and in fact, almost every municipality other than Muskoka Lakes, they have a growth plan in place. They're growing, they're doing that. Let's step it up, Muskoka Lakes, if that's in fact we want to get involved with this. But that's what you have to understand, what the district services are really about. There's not a whole lot other than Frank has brought up policing a number of times, which is great because the lack of in that we see, at least in West Muskoka, is questionable. And but I don't know that us sitting around here saying that, well, let's jump into this or let's get involved in well, again, community services is the big one, right? And very, very difficult to have really any comments at all, because when you get involved and you sit around the table, and I don't think Alan gets to enjoy it as much as we did way back when. And I would tell you the mayor of Huntsville was, she was my partner at the time and would constantly be trying to push back, as well as I, and in fact, with very, very negative responses. And understandably, when you see people in need and you see the needs out there, it's pretty challenging to say, wow, you're such a wealthy municipality, why are you pushing back? So again, I don't know what we're trying to achieve from this. Really, I think it's services that we can deal with, or if in fact we're looking at that, and it really comes down to planning in my perspective from that discussion with the district. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn it back to you, Chris, to continue working our way through. And we're trying to identify, I think, and Michael Fenn made a great comment that where we can potentially have some impact, where we can have some savings, and where ultimately at the end of the day, Muskoka Lakes can potentially save our taxpayers some dollars. So I'll leave it back with you.
Excellent, and that's absolutely it. And so what we want to do here is is just identify, in looking at your relationship with the district around services, what are your strategic options? And those options range from political options all the way through to legislative options. I'll go through each of these. Some are more feasible and easier to pursue than others. I would say the way that the legislation is structured and to make any material change in terms of the actual structure of the relationship is very difficult. But there are, political and service delivery options that I think is where council's head is at in terms of, are there areas where we can strike a better political bargain or better service delivery bargain in order to either, again, increase our residents' access to certain services and or find efficiency and savings opportunities for our local taxpayers. So I will start with the political options, and there are two. One is to build alliances with, similarly situated lower tier municipalities within the district to try to get a better result in certain service areas. So if you have, if there are shared concerns around certain services with other lower tiers, working at the council level to get those areas looked at in some detail and understand what your options, what is the current state of play and what are the options around perhaps striking a more equitable deal is essentially what this project is looking at, to get the district to do a service delivery review in areas that will be important and a priority to the township. The second is increasing, dealing with the district, dealing with the province. Are there certain things where provincial action could be taken that actually relieves district taxpayers of certain costs that they're undertaking now, and or seeing greater transfers from the senior government to help fund costs. So there, AMO was successful with the previous government getting some services uploaded or partially uploaded back to the province. There has also been a couple iterations of the gas tax transfers to municipalities to deal with capital issues in transportation. There's going to be a whole raft of things that I think come out of COVID, long-term care, public health, where it makes sense to form a district position on trying to drive a better bargain with the province on some of the costs that the province is picking up. We know from work we've done with other upper tiers and lower tiers, just the level of subsidy that a lot of municipalities are giving to their own long-term care homes because of the fact that provincial funding hadn't changed in 20 years certainly on an operating basis, with the government coming to increase its funding of long-term care. Is there an opportunity to find some savings there by relieving that burden on district taxpayers what do you do with those dollars? So those are two political options that are there. I think number one is very much where your headspace is in terms of the relationship with the district. The second is there are always opportunities to try to strike a better deal on behalf of all taxpayers through the district, working or negotiating with the province. Michael, did you want to add to that?
Well, one quick point, maybe John Matheson should make it rather than me, because he had the dealings with the municipality involved. But the idea that at the upper tier council, nothing happens unless you have 51% of the vote. So no matter how good your argument is, if you can't bring somebody with you, then it's just talk. So John, do you want to comment on your experience there?
Sure. And maybe just the whole point about alliance building is, as we've already said, there are some things that are cast in stone by statute, and there are some things where, as we've said, the district acts as sort of like the banker for a service that's dictated by the province. But there are some things that are left. And I think as we've started to feel around the edges, reaching an agreement to do things differently that can be done differently can only be done if you can get a buy-in from the rest of the political leadership to do things differently. There is another version of that, which, and I think, Chris, this may be on the next slide, but I'll just anticipate it. The other is about using political suasion to try and seek the consensus of staff to make recommendations within existing structures and existing budgets that are just more favorable in terms of the allocation of an existing spend. In both cases, politics is involved internally, and in both cases, it's usually a mix of both honey and vinegar that cause these changes to come about. And you know, it may be very personal talking about it at the district. We've all seen it happen at a federal scale, and what it is that gets Quebec what Quebec wants, or what it is that gets Alberta what it wants, or Nova Scotia what it wants, or Ontario ultimately what it doesn't want a lot of the time. And that politics plays itself out in county and district and regional levels across the province, either with existing structures or in creating the will to amend structures that can be amended. And I think that's just where the politics of it comes about. And I think that's really what we're getting at here. And it's probably a good idea to just sort of sketch out the other ones, Chris, and then we can talk about all of them holistically, because to some degree they're interrelated, these various approaches.
Chris, if I can just jump in, one of the things, if you can go back one slide, because I just want to make sure we don't miss a point. You know, you talk about number one, build alliances with other similar situated municipalities. I think we need to build alliances with all municipalities. And I think that's where John was going in his comment. And it needs to be a 1A, a 1, and a 1A in particular, because what has happened, as I've noted sitting around that district table for a number of years, we built walls between municipalities by what we perceive similar situated. We're waterfront communities, you're urban, it's us versus them. And that has certainly compounded any negative feelings and caused bigger problems at the end of the day. So I think we really just need to build alliances with all municipalities for common good. And sometimes the benefit will go to a town, sometimes it may go to a township, maybe one municipality versus another, but those relationship building period, I think, is our number one objective, and it should be. So.
Great, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about the service delivery options. I think we've covered these generally through the conversation so far. The one option is service migration from the district to the lower tier, or vice versa. If there are things that where there might be more economic and efficient to upload things to the upper tier to deliver. But this is where the migration is from the upper tier to the lower tier. It's, you know, better able to dictate the service levels you want to deliver, and, you know, being able to pay for those directly, as opposed to perhaps paying for a subsidization where you know, a service is you know, more consumed in other parts of the district. There's always risks in looking at these things. You know, the mayor raised, you know, we did take IT back, but we're still paying for certain elements of IT at the district. So again, because these things are never clean and simple, there may be residual that you continue to end up paying for because you're not able to repatriate the entirety of a service, or, you know, there's still a residual that the district has to be responsible for. Another one is increase, you know, user pay, or to the councillor's point, you know, greater use of special levies to reduce pressure on the general levy, and build in some greater equity in terms of, you know, what is subsidized versus what is paid by actual end users, or those who consume most of the service. At the end of the day, you know, this is always an option, but they're, you know, figuring out the right areas where something like this may make sense is important. And again, something like this is always going to be politically fraught because people get accustomed to what they pay, and if they're going to have to pay more, you know, that is obviously going to be something that has to be dealt with from a political perspective. And then there's always, you know, looking at service levels, and are there, you know, can you reduce service levels? This is never politically palatable. But, you know, what I took from Councillor Nishikawa's comments are that, you know, good intentions have, you know, from a community or social services perspective, enticed the district to get involved in certain things. And there may have been some teaser money from the province on the table that goes poof, and you create a program that, you know, it becomes, you know, politically or, you know, even from a, you know, real end user perspective, politically unpalatable to get out of. And so, you know, there is scope creep just as much as, you know, looking at reduction in service levels are things that, you know, may be fodder for you to look at as a way of reducing the impact on taxpayers at the end of the day. Your worship, I'll just stop there to see if there are any questions or comments on the service delivery options. We're good? Okay. Oops, sorry. You're on mute, your worship.
Sorry, Councillor Jagowitz.
Sorry, Chair, I had just trouble getting my hand up. I didn't realize you were going to ask for questions there. I think of the ones you covered so far, 4 and 5 are important and should be looked at. I think the use of user pay and other property tax alternatives is probably the best way we have of dealing with some of what we think are inequities. They don't require political change. They just acquire a different way of looking at some of the costs. And I think that Councillor Roberts indicated, you can look at policing as a service that the district provides, or you can look at it as just a flow through billing and so on. Number 5, reduce service levels. I really tie that in with number 8, and maybe I'll just comment on it now. You can reduce service levels or you cannot increase them. And I believe there are areas that the district is moving into that are optional areas, such as hospital funding, long-term care for Fairburn, which is a home situated way to the far end of the district. And I think those are areas that could be looked at also. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll go Councillor Zavitz and Councillor Hayes.
Thank you, and through you to, I guess, to Chris and our expert consultants. Of the 444 municipalities in the province of Ontario today, how many might be going through a review like this, or at least embarking on this journey? Would you folks have insights to that? And I have a second question, if I might.
I can take a stab at that, Your Worship. I can't tell you, Councillor, with precision, but I can tell you that it's very common for there to be forms of this conversation going on. And it happens typically in places where there's cross tension between more assessment rich and population poor municipalities, which have a sense of, paying more per capita. That happens when you have a high weighted assessment per capita. So it happens in a lot of sort of upper tiers that include very desirable parts of Ontario that have, that experience a spike in assessment values, and where it will show itself in very different forms. So sometimes it'll be sort of system-wide and just a general anxiety that could be summarized as we pay more than our fair share. Other times it'll show up in relation to a specific service. And the theme there will be, it's not that we're mad about everything, but but just like Councillor Jaglowitz was just saying, there's a specific service that is going to be expanded, and we feel like we're going to be passed a disproportionate share of the bill relative to the benefit we will get out of it. There's another form of it, which is, this has always been an irritant, and we did a service delivery review, and we really want to get to the bottom of fixing it. And what you would find is, particularly in the county systems where there's quite a range of county structures in terms of how robust the role of the county is versus the area municipalities. You'll find that there's very different politics from county to county to county, depending on whether municipalities have sort of managed to be kind of content with a county that, say, does a lot of centralized functions for predominantly, say, rural municipalities that have relatively little in-house capacity, versus other ones that follow more of a model of, the last thing I want is that county to grow because I pay a disproportionate share of that county. And so I want to keep that county as slim as possible. So if you were going to make me guess, I'd say that relatively, I'm going to guess it's probably less than 50 that have a kind of soup to nuts. We're just challenging our entire fiscal relationship. But I bet there's 200 municipalities in the county system that have the lighter forms of this that are more single service oriented. And I can say that with some confidence because, you know, Chris and Michael and I and the team have been involved in about 20 different service delivery reviews over the last couple of years. And where a county's involved, there's almost inevitably some aspect of who pays for what. So it's a great question that you ask, but it's most exacerbated in places where there's these tensions around very assessment-rich places and typically assessment-growing places versus places that have a more stable assessment base but more population and oftentimes more cost.
Thank you. Councillor Savage, did you have a follow-up question originally, or you're okay? Councillor Hayes.
Yes, I just wanted to point out, we don't always want to reduce service levels. Sometimes we want to increase service levels. I know we heard back from the sewage haulers some time ago who were indicating that the transfer station in Port Carling was underserviced and they weren't able to use it as much as they'd like to. I know that Mayor Harding and the Works Committee are working hard to get this done, but I just wanted to point out sometimes we have to increase the service levels. So it's the give and take, it's a balancing act.
Thank you. Chris, well, you can continue on.
Okay. The sixth option here is cost compensation grants to assist area municipalities that have extraordinary burdens, and it's meant to mitigate against costs faced by municipalities. Some municipalities have a greater share of roads, bridges, et cetera, than their neighbors, and so this is where grants can be given to a lower tier municipality equal to the cost that the upper tiers would have incurred if they had assumed responsibility for those things. There was a prior example, and we're not 100% sure if they're still doing this in Prescott Russell, but they had what they coined a county gas tax mechanism that allowed for this type of treatment to be had. So that's, this is an example. This is something that you'd have to be very careful of because there are certainly rules under the legislation as to how far you could take these types of things, but where there is an extraordinary burden being shouldered by a particular lower tier in the upper tier benefits from that, then they may look at this type of a mechanism.
Chris, if I can just add a brief comment on that. This is a really interesting example because it's not something you hear talked about very much, and it's kind of a demonstrated example of the kind of political flexibility and creativity that exists within the municipal sector. For all that we focus on the strictures and requirements of the Municipal Act, this was a nice example of a workaround that was designed to solve a local problem by some creative people who were trying to keep the peace. And I think, to Mayor Harding's point earlier about building bridges, and this was no doubt a reflection of bridges that were being built, not being burned, in terms of it being a solution that kind of made things sustainable in a moment in time. And I think in addition to these, like this one that we heard about, like I think within, sometimes if you look at roads, the allocation of roads between upper tiers and lower tiers, they are entirely rational except when they are not. And I think, if you look sometimes at the allocations of roads between upper and lower tiers, you'll find a mixture of history, what it was need to make the deal done, and say at the time when a bunch of amalgamations were going on in the period between 1998 and 2003, and then making it work with glue and tape since then. And this is probably kind of an example of something that evolved within a particular context. And it's just an interesting example of, in addition to all the stuff that's rules-based, there are sometimes workarounds which are extremely pragmatic.
Thank you. Chris?
And then the last three are the structural options that are heavily governed by legislation. The one option is to dissolve the district and go to a single tier structure. I think it's fair to say, the province started down a road where, there could have potentially been some restructurings regionally, and they backed away from that. And I don't think there's any political desire to go back there. In this instance, to do this or to, you would need what is a triple majority to actually affect something like that. It's pretty major. And that triple majority means you have to have a majority vote of the upper tier council, a majority vote of lower tier councils, not just your own, all of them. And that has to ensure that that represents a majority of the electors within the affected districts. So it's much like the amending formula for the Canadian Constitution. It's designed to be pretty onerous to get over, and likely isn't something that is politically feasible. I also don't think that's where you're coming from on something like this. To John's point, there is always the option to reduce the scope of the district, so repatriate a lot of services at the lower tier and create a district that just does a handful of things where it makes sense to aggregate service delivery or consolidate, core functions, back office functions, whatever those may be, to support the lower tiers. And so, having a weak upper tier structure similar to, Frontenac County is an example of, it's not a terribly strong upper tier. It does some basics around public health, long-term care, the library board, things of that nature is certainly an option. But again, you may not need a triple majority to make that happen, but you're certainly going to need a double majority, I would think, to make that happen. It'd be very difficult to get that kind of consensus. And then lastly, change the basis on which the district levy is assessed. So as we've said, the current formula is mandated under the Act. Other options, include moving to equalized assessment or a per capita contribution or per household contribution. This would require a change to the Municipal Act again, and the province would have to do that on your behalf. And, politically, that would be a very difficult thing to achieve, because if they do it for one, they have to do it for multiples, and it's just not a can of worms that the provincial government is likely going to want to open. So those are some of the structural options. We position them as 7, 8, 9 because they're either the least desirable or the least practical, given the hurdles that have to be cleared. Any questions on those?
Not seeing any, but I will just make one comment when you talk about structural changes. For those people who attended the AMO conference a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago now, I guess, there was a question in the Ministers' Forum from Georgian Bay Township about whether or not Minister Clark would be diving back in to assess regional councils and size and scope of that. And it was a very clear answer that the province will not be diving in to address regional councils, that they provided funding for modernization to become more efficient that way. So that's where they're headed and their focus is. So the province is not going to be jumping in to help us out there. Councillor Zavitz has a question.
I do, and thank you. I appreciate that insight you just shared. I'm remembering a line. This is not a rebellion. This has been going on. This discussion has been going on since the good minister brought the topic up, and here we are all still wrestling with it. But it is not a rebellion. I think if you go back to the beginning, Chris, thanks for the nine various options. But this is really all about the basic question of receiving the most services for the most money. Quite honestly, dial this thing right back to the beginning. We pay the most, so there's no question about that. I think the fundamental question has to be, we should be receiving the most services, whatever that means, however those services look, of all of our 5 other, I don't want to call them family members. I do not want to call them that because this is business, first of all. And we should be getting, I believe, what is our fair share. And I think that's the big question, is how does one quantify that? So that's where we are. And that's where I believe we need to go. I'm going to be interested in seeing the types of questions we're able to create that we can pose to the district to have them get their shovels out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you. Sorry. It's interesting Glenn had just brought that up. And well, I think Phil, you would have remembered when I first got on community services, and within the first couple of months, I'm going, oh, look at all of the things that are available that the district has to offer. And none of it was coming to the Township of Muskoka Lakes. And interestingly enough, at that time it was Bob Lacroix and Mr. Kennedy from Georgian Bay. We, had discussions with John Clink and said, well, how do we get this to come to our communities? And it was as simple as that. It was as simple as asking and coming up with a plan. So then very quickly we started seeing the wellness groups attending and servicing many of our seniors, and many who have really, really enjoyed all the services they brought forward. They also started bringing children's services to our community centers that we hadn't seen. But it takes others, it takes people within our own township, it takes others, of the groups involved in outside the township to start asking and saying, we want to be part of, we want this, and you will get to be part of those services. And I can recall when we did started the wellness thing, and the first step was to involve our libraries, which allowed people to apply for unemployment through our libraries. The district council would send people out to meet people in their own community, as opposed to having to find a way to get to Bracebridge, because that's a big challenge if others aren't aware of it. Many of our folks that are working the marginal jobs don't have transportation. So again, there's a lot that we can be tapping into. And the same with, I think some of you know that I'm involved with the child in Torrance that is having cancer issues. And we have tapped into a number of services there, but also there's a lot more. So all I'm saying is that it takes us as a council to look into and what we can tap into. There is services that we could be, but it's not a way to reduce the cost. Because I will tell you that getting those extra services to come to the 3 other municipalities was not an increase. Like really, they just tapped into bodies that they already had going for other things. So again, it's up to us to also address that.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to go to Councillor Kelly, then Councillor Hayes, and then Chris, back to you, because I know you really want to ask us some questions and get us a little more involved, though I think we've somewhat been involved throughout this whole presentation. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you, I just really wanted to go back to a reference that Councillor Zavitz made, and I think Councillor Nishikawa sort of echoed it a little bit as well. I don't think, throughout this discussion, there's been a sense, and I don't just mean this discussion over the last hour and a half. I mean, as we've contemplated this kind of a review, there periodically sounds like a bit of a rebellion here. Like we're doing something very roguish, and we're stepping out of line, and we're challenging. And quite frankly, I think it ought to be perceived as exactly the opposite. I've never been part of any business or any family that didn't periodically sit down and look at expenditures and look at the service levels and the expectations for new and different levels of service over time, and how we're going to fund and where the revenue is going to come from. So I see this as nothing more than an extraordinarily healthy exercise that, quite frankly, I'm surprised that it has to come down to a DMM review or a service level review. I mean, we should build this into a periodic assessment that's done just to make sure a few things, make sure that we're getting maximum efficiencies from the scale that we represent within the district, making sure that there aren't things being concealed in the way of special levies that, quite frankly, inappropriately increase the expense to the township. I'm a big one on downloading opportunities, and I have no idea whether we can operate any more efficiently by taking on more responsibility. But I do know we need to look at it, and we need to keep an eye on it and look at it regularly and make sure there isn't duplication and a lack of efficiency that comes with a lack of scale that comes with splitting the responsibility. And the last thing that I want to say is I actually don't know that this is just about or all about a cost takeout. And I use the police services as an example, and a real quick example. We may decide that there's no getting around the current cost structure for the OPP service, but maybe if we put our ducks in the right order and we ask the appropriate level, people might understand that it may be worth more to our constituents to have fewer patrols in police cars and more in boats or on sleds in the winter. So I'm not talking necessarily about cost takeout. I'm not talking about service level increases. I'm talking about service level deliverables that are appropriate for our circumstance and our needs. And so, I think I look forward to this exercise because there's an answer. It's an equation. We will figure it out. We may not get everything we want. We certainly won't get anything that we want if we don't ask for it. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hayes, do you have a question?
It's more of a comment. I think by saying we want our 30% and starting with that, I think that would cause a very divisive argument I would rather that we identify the places that we feel that we are not getting enough for what we feel we have put into it, and work collaboratively and point out areas where we feel that we are short and looking for new ways to fund it, whether that means downloading, realigning of duties, or expanding of duties. I think we have to look at it as this is not a Township of Muskoka Lakes issues. This is a district and lower tier issue, and working with them to find the solutions is probably going to be the best and quickest way that we can do it.
Okay, Councillor Zavitz, one more question, then I'm going to go back to Chris.
Sorry, thank you, and through you. I hate to take issue with what my good fellow councillor just said, but this is very much, in my mind, this is very much, to my earlier statement, this is very much a 32%. What do we get for what do we put? I don't know how many people go out and pay more for gas or pay more for food or pay more for any service or product than they absolutely have to within the confines of situational scenarios. So, we are simply questioning, and therefore, what an easy question to pose. Hey, folks, what are you charging us for this? What are you charging us for that? Based on the other five, and quite honestly, the other ones are lucky that we're here because we contribute greatly. We've seen it. I hate to make this political, but it became political when the three towns walked away from the three townships and simply said, "Hey, we don't want to change the voting." So let's call a spade a spade. I mean, right here and now, we want value for our money, and it should be incumbent on the people that are providing the service to create an environment where here's what Lake of Bays, here's the allocations, if you will. There must be an accountability piece. So I'm not buying this whole idea that one would never know. We're getting less service or more service. I wouldn't know that, and I don't think we should presume for one moment that we would be able to understand that. This has to come from the district, and the only way they're going to be able to do that is some sort of fulsome review, and unless I'm wrong about it. Thank you.
Councillor Hayes, I want to say a rebuttal.
Yeah, just to clarify, there are two ways of raising funds. One is putting it on the assessment and doing it by mill rate. We have to look at what is put on that assessment, and are those the proper things that should be put on an assessment, or should they be done by household? And given the cost back to the township, and then the township will decide whether to put it on a household or on a mill rate. And that would be more of understanding where our money is going to. There are certain things, like it was pointed out by one of the presenters, you can't say, okay, only people that have children in school are going to pay for school taxes. There are things that you can't quantify, like our long-term care, our ambulance and our airports, our social housing, our environment. You can't quantify that. Everybody just has to put something into the pot. And although a lot of our taxpayers have very high assessments, that's what's causing the inequity. And I think that we have to look at what do we charge by assessment and what do we charge by household, and that would bring it down to a better balance. I wasn't saying that we shouldn't get our fair share, but there are some things that we are sharing that it doesn't matter how much we put into it. It has to be there for everyone because everyone uses it at some point.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Chris, and I'll let you continue on, because I know we have some questions for us here as we're trying.
Yeah, and your worship,
half an hour.
Yeah, and I think we've answered a couple. So let me summarize what I think we've heard, and then what I want to get is folks' perspectives on where you think there's an opportunity to quote unquote sharpen the pencils, and that would be good fodder for a services review. I don't think anybody's looking at any of the nuclear options that we presented as part of the 9 options. We are looking for political options and looking at ways to look at services differently, and perhaps look at how those services are either how those services are extended into the community, and or how those services are perhaps better funded based on how those and who is consuming those services. So I think in answer to this question 3, it's, we're looking at political solutions around service delivery and service levels, and how those are consumed and how those are funded to be put in the window for a district services review. And I think we've answered a lot of the questions that folks have had as we've gone through the presentation on the legislative and take some notes on the fiscal context as well. So if I'm understanding where where council wants to go strategically, my question for council is, to pick up on Councillor Hayes's point, where do you feel you're not getting what you're putting into the district? So what areas of service would you like us to go away and think about and advise you on? Yes, this is something where there might be something there, and you want to put it as part of your request for a service delivery review, or we could even come back and say, there's going to be limited optionality in something like this, and you're better to focus resources in certain other areas. So, Your Worship, if I can get concurrence on, I framed the strategically where council wants to go correctly, and then feedback on where council where council feels they're not getting the value, and they'd like that looked at a little bit more closely.
Okay, I'm going to turn this over to council in particular. I'll throw out there, I think number one is we know from a billing perspective, the service level of OPP versus the cost of OPP are different, and need to try and look at options and changes for that. But I'll turn to the rest of council. Councillor Nishikawa first, then Bridgman.
Thank you. I think almost that it would be good if the screen was put back up about what the district services were. There was, I think, 3 years involved. I'm picturing colors, 3 colors. Anyhow, mostly what I want to say is that when you start to look through that list, again, what are you going to choose? Well, what impacts us the most are our roads, our bridges, or excuse me, our roads and our garbage. is what we hear from our taxpayers. I personally don't have a comfort level that I can jump into community services. There's a lot of very private information that is involved in some of that stuff, so a lot of it can't be shared. Also, it's an interesting conversation because, you know, there's funding that comes in. It's not just from the municipalities, it comes from the province as well. So it's a difficult, community service is very difficult. The same with, if we talk about Fairburn. And I was that one that, you know, was the only one that stood up and said, no, it's not going to be Muskoka Lakes. That's not how we want this thing to go down. But in fact, it will be a provincial home, which would mean that anyone in the province can be in that home. Whether they're from Township, Muskoka Lakes or not, anyone from the province can be in those provincial homes, the same with the Pines. So again, if we're only talking about or trying to grab those few items that we might be able to have a discussion about, again, for me, it comes down to the roads. Basically, policing is there as well, and garbage disposal, and that whole discussion about, you know, what happens in West Muskoka isn't the same that happens in East Muskoka. I will say that louder than anything. And also, I would also add in there with for years, I've been following the challenges with our septic removal companies when the district keeps closing down different lagoons and seeing things and makes their business much more difficult. So I'd like to, again, that's something more that I can delve, but everything else, those other big numbers from health services and from community service I think are very difficult for our municipality to tap into, unless we're going to get into that business.
Okay, thank you for that. I think, Chris, you had the right slide up. Page 18, I think, is an appropriate, or maybe that slide as well, but helped us understand a little bit of the spending, and maybe the one overlay as well. Many of these health services in particular, or community planning, we have a bunch of provincial funding. So it'd be interesting to try and overlay on this what's funded by the province and what's funded by the levy in particular.
Okay.
And then I'll go to Councillor Bridgman, Councillor Zavitz, then Councillor Jagowitz.
Thank you, Mayor Harding. And maybe this is more of a question, Chris, for you and your team, but I agree with Councillor Nishikawa. It's garbage, it's policing, it's our roads. I mean, when we talked about this in the strategic plan, one of my comments was, I need to really understand how all of this is funded. So I am hoping that that's what's going to come back to us as part of this review, so that I can communicate that also to our constituents. But those are the three main areas for me. But I also look at something like our planning services, because it's complicated with the district involved in so much of it. So that's an area that I would like to see the pros and cons of leaving it there or asking that it come down. So those would be my requests.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you. And through you, if I might, again, I'm going to reinforce my earlier notions that I would prefer to see this at a much higher level. I do not want to delve into the specifics in our first meeting of the three pet peeves. I might say that our own CAO, Derek Hammond, has been instrumental in getting us to here today. And I haven't heard from Derek, and I certainly would appreciate a few high-level words from him in terms of how we got to where we are, just for clarity. Is that a fair ask of the CAO?
Mr. Hammond, do you want to chime in a little bit at this particular point?
Your Worship, I think Council's having the conversation that you've wanted, that is stemmed out of the strategic plan. I think there's a from what I'm hearing, there's a desire from members of council to understand the relationship. I think Strategy Core is provided you the background, and they're asking you, what are the areas that you want to explore further? And I think that's part of building that strategy to improve that relationship that council has expressed that it wishes to do. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Jagowitz.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to answer the question, and then I have a request, which I'll take your advice as to whether I should add it on to this or do it at the very end, but I'd like not to lose it. I just wonder, you've got page 18 up there, and I think this is a significant page. If you look at it from the top down, the first 7 items are things that upper tiers generally get involved with. I'm gonna deal with health separately, but ignoring that for the moment, those are things, and I think that they're doing a decent job on those. But then what you see happening is they've tacked on 4 things to the bottom. And I think this is where we should concentrate. Airport, police services, property assessment services, and health unit. Airport is no longer a district-run project. It has its own people, its own board of directors. Police services the district has no role in that at the moment. Property assessment, they just pay the bill. And health unit, once again, pay the bill. Those are the areas where I think there's possibility to look at having those costs allocated differently. And I debated whether to put the airport in there because I think we benefit from the airport, but maybe the airport themselves should be charging the lower tier municipalities. Maybe the district should butt out of it. I don't know. There certainly has been some controversy there, one against the other. So those are the areas I'd like to see some discussion on. Then we go up to the health services, and I don't take large issue with what's going on there today, but I am concerned about the future of that line, okay? And that's where the 93 million or that, whatever it is, 60, 90, 70, 80 million for hospital financing is coming up. That's where the second long-term care home, Fairburn, 60 million plus a $1 million annual operating deficit, okay? And those are things that, in my view, there should have been more care at the district as to how those are paid for. Everybody agrees we have to go there, but nobody really got into how they should be paid for. There was some discussion about Fairburn, there would be that conversation, but it's just not happening, okay? And we all know why it is. It's the way that it's structured. So I think that's kind of my 2 bits. Now, Mr. Chair, do you want me to make my request now or hold it to the end?
Why don't you hold that for just a moment here? I just want to go through any other specifics at this time, and then we'll go to your other bigger request. Any other specifics that we need to look at this point, Council? Okay, I think we're there. I just want to echo Councillor Jago's comments, and you know, some of the health services and hospital funding and everything, you know, and I think John referenced it, you know, from an AMO policy perspective, and we're not alone in that. We consistently see a greater downloading right now of provincial costs to lower tiers, either single or upper tier municipalities as well. And you know, we might need to put together and formulate some specific strategies to go after the province in particular in some of that. So I'll leave that out there and echo Councillor Jagowitz's comments. But I see Councillor Edwards has his hand up.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Harding. Can you hear me? Policing is one of the main issues. As Councillor Jagowitz said, it's $3 million that we're paying that it's over and above. I know the last council we looked into it. I still say we should have our own police services board. The consultants can look into that for the simple fact that Caledon has the OPP in the region of Peel, where the other municipalities there have their regional police. It's not a first of, it's not one of a kind. It can be done. It down in the London area, I think there's another another municipality that opted out. So that's one of that's $3 million right there. Planning, the last term of council, I almost had the district to download subdivisions and condo agreements. And I think if we can't get that downloaded, what it should be is the same as lawyers' billable hours, and bill it right to the developer. That we should not be paying for subdivisions. We should not be paying for condo agreements. They are profiting from it, and that should be downloaded right to the actual developer. I have fought for years to get the development charges back up to where they should be. We're paying 50% of all the development charges now. They're regular taxpayers, and that's wrong. And that, as far as health services, we have the health hub out here, and which is great. The district wouldn't even rent the lower area of that to move services out here at that time. There's offices, the boardroom that they can be coming out and meeting with clients, so they don't have to drive into Bracebridge or Huntsville or wherever it is. So there's things like that. I was involved when they got with the school board with the and that with the childcare, taking the basement. They wanted to rent it out at their hourly rate, and that, and we fought at the district for it. Somebody put some money up for it, and it's there now. But it's always a fight. It always seems to be in the townships that they get the most. And yes, we can get nice and friendly with everybody. When push comes to shove, everybody puts their wall up and starts it again. And I think you'll see it again. But anyway, it's something that we should be looking at. And I'll just listen to what everyone else has to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hayes.
Thank you. I did mention earlier that we should look at how certain services are billed. I think we should also look into the services and how the services have grown. Back some years ago, we were paying 50% to education tax, 35% to the district and 15% for the township, roughly. Now the education has gone down, but through downloading from the province, the district level has gone up and has now increased to be almost half of what we're paying. I'd like to look at the actual services that are provided. I will say more than 40 years ago, and this is going way back, there was 9 people in the community services, 9 employees. That was it. Secretary, treasurer, director, and 6 workers that covered all 6 areas with a workload that is, I would like to know what how much has the workload increased to the number of staff that we have that are looking after the community services. And if that's gone up in relation, then that's fine. If it hasn't, then we should look at see what we're doing differently. What are the things that we could cut back on? Like, it's good to have meat and potatoes, but what have we got for gravy out there? I think all of the areas would be interested in looking at that.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you, I guess this, and I think we're at sort of where we're trying to build our next steps here. And I can tell you that I don't see how we move this forward if we start calling out individual services and billing statements that we get from the district. Because if we sit here long enough, we'll cover everything and we'll make some up to add to them. I look at it a little differently, and I think there's kind of an intermediate step to try to put some structure to it. There's really only, in my mind, 3, maybe 4 different headers that are the lenses through which we look at the services and the cost of those services. And in my mind, it's just loosely thrown together. It's efficiencies, it's downloading, it's fee for service levels. And by that, there's two components. Are the fees appropriate? I mean, maybe we could generate considerably more income and cover a lot more expense if we were charging an appropriate level for whatever service is being delivered. The other side of the coin is, as I said earlier about the police services, I don't know if the fees need to go up or down or just stay the same, but the service level change. I think all of that falls into the fee for service kind of level of things. And then the last piece, and the one where I'm a little bit less structured in my thought, is a general notion of fairness. Once we've gone through and determined that there's not any real efficiencies, structural efficiencies, there's not any sort of downloading opportunities, or if there are, we're going to go after them, that the fees for service are appropriate. At the end of the day, real human beings have to write checks to pay for all of this. And is the level that's being asked of them, given the relationship they have with the township and with the district, is that level fair in all of the circumstances? I think that's kind of a catch basin at the end of the day that says if we can't figure it out by going specifically through these other headers, we owe it to everybody to take a look at the fairness of the overall assessment, the overall cost of being here. And I think before we start jumping to what I think are solutions to the specific problems, let's look at it through that filter and figure out whether there's real issues of efficiency that aren't being recognized, and the other headers that I mentioned. I won't repeat them again. That's it. Thank you.
Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you. And through you, I think just to echo those comments, I mean, today is tax day, and I know I paid $7,000 on some property, and for what? Again, echoing that old adage about what do we get for our tax dollar. I mean, I think we as a council can stand up and answer that question, and I think that's why this is on the dance floor, if you will, here and now. That in fact, we owe it to a whole lot of people who pay taxes here to proceed with this in an orderly fashion, in a very organized fashion, and we deserve, or they deserve at least, the opportunity for us to take and turn over all the rocks and see what's under there. And I think to Councillor Kelly's earlier comment, in a more fulsome manner, on a more regular basis, this is what should be occurring. And here to here and now. I look forward to our next meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Chris, I know we're got about 7 minutes left here, sort of as a summary. Again, I don't think we need Strategy Corp to answer all these questions. I think we need you to help us provide a strategy to look at and find some solutions to some of these problems. And so I'll turn it back to you at that particular point. And I'll also just remind Council, you've heard me say this before, I appreciate what Councillor Zavitz pays for taxes for his property. I'm going to assume that the home who's there year round across the street probably pays 1/4 of what you pay. So we also need to look internally at this. And, there is a fundamental market value assessment that calculates our taxes. And unless we're going to go down the road and try and change that at the province, there's only certain things we can and can't do. So anyway, I'll leave Chris sort of a summary and then what you recommend as next steps, but we look for your guidance to how we might achieve some of these changes. Oh, and before you go to that, I know Councillor Jagowitz, thank you, just raised his hand because he had also one question and ask, and I'll go to that now. Thank Frank.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope this is a good time. My concern is with the document that's in front of us. I believe it's misleading, the data is. So if it's intended, it's in the public domain. The district and all of our municipality friends can download it and quote it as numbers. Councillor Zavitz referred to the 32% number twice. That number is incorrect, or at least it's not put in the right perspective. So what I would be asking And I wonder if you could go to page 12. Is it possible just to go to page 12 on that document? And I think it should be revised because it's the foundation document. This tells us that all costs have to be shared by assessment. That's not true. There are other costs that can be done by special levies and other ways. That should be modified to say there's more than one way to assess the district costs to the taxpayers, okay? Well, then if we go forward to page 15, if we go to 15, as I've pointed out, you've totaled up the general levy and the special service levies, and this is very misleading. That's what ends up with that 32%. So they should be listed separately, the general levy and then the special area levies to get the real impact. And then what that does, if you go to the next page, that means the numbers on that page change and those percentages at the bottom all change. Go to the next page. Those numbers likely change because you've got all the capital costs, I believe, for all the special service areas in there, water and sewer. And then when you go to the next pages, they are strictly numbers on the general levy. I think this should be restricted to the general tax levy, and those other service areas could be an add-on. If you're not prepared to make those changes and republish it as a foundation document, then I would suggest that it be either pulled back or labeled as not approved or something. I hope you would do that. I spent a lot of time in preparation for this subject a couple of years ago, preparing these numbers, and I know, and I'm also happy to talk with your staff just to share what I have if that would help. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments, Councillor Jagowitz. I think between Strategy Corp and also our own Director Donaldson, we should be able to extrapolate some of that data. And I think looking at the general levy and also the special services levy might answer some other questions for all of us as we move forward. So I think certainly duly noted. To your comment back about the legislative framework as far as MPAC, market value assessment, maybe I think the question specifically to Strategy Corp is where special levies are used, maybe some greater insight as to how and why they're used, or is there a definition criteria around when they're allowed to be used? So that might be helpful to understand that. And I'll look to you, and I'm somewhere between Mr. Fenn and Mr. Matheson. I'm sure we can come up with that. So,
yep, not a problem. Okay, no, this is very helpful, and I take Councillor Jagowitz's points, and we'll make those updates, and we'll answer that question on the where and how special levies can be used. List of service has list of services: policing, roads, waste, planning services, airport health, property assessment, health services. Looking at those areas, I also appreciate the I think it was Councillor Kelly's framework for efficiencies, downloading, fee for service levels, and then general fairness. What we're going to do as a next step is we're going to provide advice on these areas and what you should be looking at in terms of an ask around the review of these areas, because we're here to help you scope the right questions to be asked in a district service review, so that you get the answers to the questions that you have, and the district and the lower tiers can make decisions on what is appropriate to drive greater equity in services and how those are paid for. So the focus of the next workshop will be on our advice on, do you look at these, in which case, what kinds of questions are you answering? What kinds of questions do you want to have answered in these service areas, so that you can take that to the district, and then we'll get you to validate that, and then that arms you to go to the district and work with your lower tier colleagues to get this type of a review approved and underway at the district level.
Okay, thank you. Any other final comments from yourselves at this point, or we go back to the full screen? Just want to say thank you. Obviously not an easy task to guide us through all this, and lots of comments, opinions, and I do appreciate the depth of knowledge from our council and some of the insightful questions in that. You know, as we try to unpack this and try to make sure we deliver the best value we can for our constituents, I think we've got some really great minds around this table to help put together a strategy to do a better job. And I think that's all we can be asked to do. So Chris and John and Michael, thank you very much for your time today and appreciate it. And we will look forward to our next steps. So I have a couple of resolutions to finish us off. Number one, moved by Councillor Hayes, seconded by Councillor Jagowitz, be it resolved that bylaw 2021-140 to confirm the proceedings of council be read a first, second, and third time. All those in favor? Madam Clerk, I think we're all good there. And then one final, moved by Councillor Kelly, seconded by Councillor Zavitz, be it resolved that this meeting adjourn at 1:30. Look at that, right on time, PM. Any further comments? All those in favor?
That's 10:30 BC time, Phil.
We will put you as a 3-hour delay in approval of that.
Yeah, well, this is it. And not only that, Councillor Zavitz, he pays for that beautiful sunset. He keeps posting on that. That's his view. So it's worth it.
There we go. Thank you, everyone. And I know tomorrow morning we've got a special planning meeting. Not everyone will be able to be there, but look forward to that. And Strategy Corp, thanks again for your help. We'll talk to you soon.
Have a good day.
Bye, everybody.